I was sitting in my living room when my phone buzzed, and what I read shattered me. My hands shook as I held the screen, my heart racing in my chest. The message was from my only son, Lucas. Mum, don't even bother coming to the wedding. Emma doesn't want you there. Your presence will ruin everything. I must have read those words 10 times, hoping they would somehow change, but they didn't. Each time they cut deeper like a knife twisting in the same wound. I thought about the years I spent raising him alone, the nights I skipped meals just so he could have shoes for school, the mornings I woke up sore but kept working so he could have a better life. And now, on the happiest day of his life, I was told I wasn't wanted. What hurt most was that in my pocket I still had the receipt for the wire transfer, the last of my savings. 2 years of hachiekis of sacrifice. Almost $20,000 I had planned to send that morning to pay for their dream honeymoon in Cancun. While I had gone without, I thought I was giving him a gift of love. But in that moment, I realized love wasn't what they saw in me anymore. I froze. My mind was racing. My heart felt like it might break right out of my chest. Should I still go through with it? Should I give them the money anyway? Or should I finally keep something for myself after all these years? That was the moment I knew my life was about to change forever. I can still feel the weight of those years in my hands. My palms carry scars that will never fade, reminders of the decades I spent climbing telephone poles, tightening wires, and bracing against winds that cut through my jacket. Rain or shine, blistering summers or freezing winters. I was out there with my tool belt strapped on, making sure other families had light and connection. That was my life as a line worker. Hard, dangerous, relentless. I was never rich. I didn't wear fancy clothes or drive new cars. But I had one reason that kept me going every single day: my son, Lucas. He was the center of everything. Each paycheck, each overtime shift, every ache in my back, I told myself it was all worth it, if it gave him even a slightly better life. When I brought home new notebooks for school, or shoes to replace the ones with holes in the soles, his little smile was my reward. I didn't take vacations. I didn't dream big for myself. My dream was him. Lucas was my pride, my joy, my proof that all the long nights and early mornings had meaning. But here's the question that haunted me as I looked at those scars one night, while sitting alone in my rocking chair after all the sacrifices, after giving him every ounce of strength I had. Would it ever be enough for him to see it? Would he ever understand what it cost me to raise him? From the very beginning, I knew I didn't belong in Emma's world. Still, I tried. I forced a smile, every time her eyes flicked toward me with that hint of disdain. The kind of look that told me my presence was tolerated, not welcomed. She was always talking about the vacations she wanted to take, the luxury she expected, the lifestyle she dreamed of. I listened quietly, nodding, while the calluses on my hands reminded me of how far I was from that glittering life she chased. I wore my best blouse when they invited me over for dinner, though I saw her glance at it like it had come from another century. I kept my voice soft, even when I felt the sting of her words, because I thought if I just tried a little harder, maybe she would see I wasn't her enemy. Maybe she would see I was only a mother who wanted her son to be happy. Deep down, though, I could feel the distance. Emma's smile never quite reached her eyes when I walked into the room, and Lucas, caught between us, never said much. I told myself it didn't matter. Love could build bridges, right? If I just showed her enough kindness, she might eventually accept me. But as I sat across from her one evening, watching her laugh about champagne toasts and honeymoon resorts, I couldn't help but wonder if I was fooling myself. Maybe my hope was nothing more than a fragile thread waiting to snap. I had learned how to stretch a dollar further than most people thought possible. When the price of my medication went up, I quietly cut the pills in half to make them last longer. I clipped coupons, skipped dinners out, and counted every coin that rattled in the old jar on my kitchen counter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. For 2 years I saved like that. Every small sacrifice, every choice to go without, had a single purpose. I wanted to give Lucas and Emma something I never had: a memory of joy untouched by struggle. A honeymoon in Cancun. White sand, turquoise water, the kind of paradise I had only ever seen in postcards. I imagined them laughing on the beach, holding hands, believing their marriage was starting in a world of beauty and abundance. That thought alone made the long nights and skipped meals feel worth it. But life has a cruel way of twisting your sacrifices into heartbreak. Just when I thought I was finally giving them something pure and beautiful, the message arrived. The words that would shatter me. I stared at that folded receipt for the transfer, my chest heavy. It was supposed to be a gift of love, a symbol of everything I had worked for. Instead, it became a reminder that no matter how much I gave, sometimes it was never enough. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the computer screen, my finger hovering over the button that would send away $20,000, the last of my savings, the last of my safety net. For years, I had imagined this moment as one filled with pride, not pain. But instead of joy, all I felt was the echo of that message still burning in my chest. Don't come. You're not wanted. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I chose myself. With a single click, I cancelled the transfer. The weight lifted and crashed down all at once. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about dignity. If my presence wasn't valued, then neither would my sacrifices be taken for granted. Then came the harder part. I scrolled through my contacts, found my son's name, and pressed block. My thumb hesitated for a fraction of a second, trembling with all the memories of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and birthday candles. And then I did it. His number went dark. The silence afterward was deafening, but it also felt strangely like freedom. As I sat there in the quiet, I realized this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. A new kind of battle had just started. One I never imagined, fighting a battle not with strangers, but with the very child I had given everything to. Not long after I blocked my son, the phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me who it was. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. On the other end, Emma's voice was as sharp as glass. There was no greeting, no hesitation, just a demand. Send the money, now. For a moment, I sat in silence, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. All the years of biting my tongue, of swallowing disrespect, of telling myself to keep the peace came flooding back. But this time was different. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I steadied my breath and said words I had never spoken to her before. No. And don't ask again. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice of someone who had finally drawn a line in the sand. There was a pause on her end, the kind of silence that tells you your refusal hit harder than any insult could. I could almost hear her mind racing, searching for the next weapon to use. I hung up before she could say another word. For once, I wasn't the one left speechless. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the last call. When someone feels entitled to everything, you have a single no doesn't stop them. It only makes them push harder. I never thought I would see the day when I had to face my own son across a courtroom. Yet there I was, sitting at a long wooden table, the sound of shuffling papers and the echo of footsteps filling the room. Lucas stood on the other side, not as my child, but as an accuser. His claim was brutal and humiliating, that I was no longer in my right mind, that I was incapable of making decisions, that my life needed to be managed by someone else. By him. The words stung more than any insult. To say I was losing it was to erase decades of sacrifice, years of careful work, and the independence I had fought to keep. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about my very identity. I knew I couldn't walk into that room empty-handed, so I gathered every piece of proof I could. Medical records signed by my doctors, notarized statements affirming my mental clarity. Bank records organized down to the last penny. I spent nights going through old files, making sure nothing could be twisted against me. Every page was a shield, every signature a line of defense. But still, I couldn't silence the ache in my chest. How did we get here? How did a son I once cradled in my arms, whose fever I soothed with cool cloths, stand before strangers and try to strip me of my dignity? I told myself I wasn't just fighting for property or pride. I was fighting for the right to remain whole, to be seen as the woman I truly was, not the fragile version he wanted the court to believe. And as the judge raised her eyes to begin the hearing, I asked myself the question no mother ever dreams of facing, would the bond of blood survive the cold weight of law? Or would the system confirm what I already feared, that love alone could not protect me anymore? The day of the hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer by my side. My heart pounded, but I had prepared for this moment. As Lucas sat across the aisle, his eyes filled with cold determination, I reminded myself that I wasn't powerless. Not this time. When my attorney stood, he began presenting the evidence we had carefully gathered. Medical evaluations confirming I was of sound mind. Notarized documents showing my financial decisions were deliberate, and records that painted a clear picture of a woman fully capable of managing her own life. Every sheet of paper felt like a brick building a wall between me and the lies they tried to tell. The judge listened intently, occasionally nodding, and then finally leaned forward. Her voice cut through the heavy silence. The petition was denied. The accusations were baseless. In that moment, I felt a wave of relief rush through me. But it wasn't just relief, it was vindication. I wasn't the confused, unstable woman Lucas and Emma wanted me to appear to be. I was still me. And the truth had spoken louder than their greed. But then came the twist neither of them expected. The judge announced that the court would also be looking into the possibility of fraud, into the suspicious financial documents and the questionable actions Lucas and Emma had submitted. Instead of winning control over my life, they had opened the door to an investigation that could cost them everything. I looked over at them. Lucas avoided my gaze. Emma's face tightened, her confidence cracked. For the first time, they realized they were standing on shaky ground. Still, a question lingered in my heart. Would this defeat stop them? Or would it only fuel their desperation to take from me what they couldn't win in court? I thought the courtroom victory would finally bring me peace, but I was wrong. Winning on paper didn't stop the whispers that crept into my neighborhood. One morning, as I picked up bread from the corner store, I caught two women murmuring behind me. Their voices were hushed, but the words were clear enough to pierce straight through me. Poor Margaret. She's not all there anymore. Her son's taking care of her now. I froze for a moment, clutching the bag in my hand. To them it was just gossip, but to me it was a dagger. It wasn't only about money anymore. It was about my name, my dignity, the image I had built over decades of hard work and sacrifice. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the dim glow of the streetlights. I remembered what my late husband used to say, respect isn't given, you earn it every day. And when someone tries to take it from you, you have to fight to keep it. I realized I couldn't just defend myself in court. I had to defend myself in the eyes of the people who had known me my whole life. So the next day, I propped up my phone, sat in my old rocking chair, and hit record. No filters, no fancy background, just me in my plaid shirt looking straight into the camera. My name is Margaret Alvarez. I'm 76 years old. I've worked my entire life, raised my son with everything I had, and I'm still here, clear-minded and capable. Don't believe the lies. I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly what I own. I sent that video to my neighbors, to old colleagues, as to friends who still had me in their contacts. Some responded right away, telling me they believed me, that they knew I was still sharp and strong. Others stayed silent, maybe unsure of what to believe. And that's the hardest part, when your own community looks at you with doubt. I could feel the weight of every stare, every half-hearted smile, every whispered word. But I also knew one thing: silence would have destroyed me faster than lies ever could. I thought I had seen the worst of it. Court battles, neighborhood gossip, even the humiliation of proving I was still of sound mind. But nothing prepared me for the knock on my gate one quiet afternoon. Two men in suits stood there, clipboards in hand, their tone polite but firm. "Mrs. Alvarez, we're here from the National Bank. We need to verify some details on a loan registered under your name." For a second I laughed nervously, thinking they had the wrong house. I had never applied for any loan in my life. But then they opened their folder, and my blood ran cold. On the paper was my name, my address, even my social security number. But the signature scribbled at the bottom, it wasn't mine, a sloppy imitation twisted into a cruel joke. And under reference contact was the name that stopped my heart, Lucas, my son. I felt my hands tremble as I stared at the document. How far had he fallen, saving for his dreams, working long hours, skipping meals? I had done it all for him. And now he was using my identity as if I were nothing more than a tool to squeeze dry. I looked the men straight in the eye, forcing calm into my voice. "Gentlemen, that signature isn't mine. I never applied for this. If you want proof, I'll show you my ID, my bank records, everything." I led them into my kitchen, laid my documents out on the table like a shield. They made a few quick calls, exchanged uneasy glances, and finally apologized. "Mrs. Alvarez, this seems to be fraud. We'll investigate further." When the door closed behind them, I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my hat, stuffed the forged paper into my purse, and marched to the police station. I wasn't going to let silence bury me again. A seasoned officer listened carefully as I explained. When I finished, he nodded. "You're doing the right thing. Most people your age stay quiet out of fear or shame, but we'll file this as attempted fraud and identity theft." Walking out of that station, complaint receipt in hand, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there. Yes, but alongside it burned a stubborn pride. I wasn't just a victim, I was fighting back. Just when I thought I had steadied myself, the storm only grew stronger. One morning, I opened my gate to find two court officers standing with a sealed envelope. Their expressions were cold, professional, the kind that offered no comfort. Inside was an order that made my chest tighten. Every one of my bank accounts had been frozen. And worse attached was a provisional request to seize my house, the very walls I had built brick by brick decades ago. The same roof that sheltered my husband until his last breath. The same porch where I raised my boy were now at risk of being stripped away. I sat at my kitchen table, the notice spread out before me. No tears came. Only silence, heavy and suffocating. Money was one thing, but losing my home meant losing the last piece of myself. My history, my safe ground. But I wasn't completely defenseless. In my old blue folder lay every true document I had kept over the years. The original deed to the house, updated tax receipts, notarized statements, medical certificates that proved my clarity of mind. That folder, worn and overstuffed, had become my shield, my only weapon. I knew Lucas and Emma had forged papers before. They had spread lies, planted rumors, even tried to turn neighbors against me. But this was different. This was an attempt to uproot my entire life, and it was a war I could not afford to lose. I called my lawyer immediately, and together we prepared for the next hearing. Every page, every receipt, every signature was carefully stacked and ready to be shown to the judge. It wasn't just paper. It was proof of my dignity. Proof that I was still standing no matter how much they tried to break me. Yet as the date drew near, a single thought haunted me at night. Would the truth be enough this time? Could those documents, as solid as they were, stop the machine that was trying to grind me down? The cruelest blow came when I thought they had already reached the lowest point. That morning I walked into the courtroom and saw Lucas standing tall beside Emma, his lawyer ready at his side. This time they weren't after my money or my house. They were after something far worse, my very name as a mother. The complaint read like a dagger to the chest. Lucas accused me of abandonment, of neglect, of being absent when he needed me most. Words that twisted reality into something unrecognizable. I sat there stunned, the same hands that once carried him through sleepless nights, now trembling under the weight of betrayal. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice or argue point by point. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single photograph. It was Lucas, maybe 7 years old, smiling in his little school uniform, his arms wrapped tightly around me. I held it up for the judge to see my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "Your Honor," I said, "this is my son. I walked him to school every day. I stayed awake 3 nights straight when he broke his arm, just holding his hand so he wouldn't be afraid. I worked double shifts to keep food on the table and to pay his tuition. Everything I had went to him. How could anyone call that abandonment?" The room fell quiet. Emma looked away, her usual cold confidence cracking for just a second. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. On my side, neighbors and old friends I had asked to testify nodded quietly, ready to speak if called. The judge leaned back, reviewing the evidence, the school receipts, the hospital records, the testimony from people who had seen me raising Lucas with their own eyes. He asked me one last question. "Mrs. Alvarez, do you believe you fulfilled your duty as a mother?" I looked at him directly, tears finally welling, but my voice unwavering. "I didn't just fulfill it, Your Honor. I lived for it." Every scar on these hands, every wrinkle on this face came from giving my son a better chance than I ever had. The silence that followed was unbearable. It felt like the entire courtroom was holding its breath. Would the law recognize the truth of a lifetime of sacrifice? Or would lies win this battle too? The courtroom was heavy with silence when the judge finally looked up from the stack of papers before him. His voice was steady, each word cutting through the tension like a blade. "This court finds no evidence to support the claim of incapacity. On the contrary, the documentation and testimonies clearly prove Mrs. Alvarez is fully capable. Therefore, the petition is denied. Furthermore, I am ordering an investigation into possible perjury and fraud committed by Lucas Alvarez and Emma Carter." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a legal win. It was my dignity, my years of sacrifice, my truth finally being acknowledged. They hadn't just failed to take my house or my saving, they had failed to strip away my honor as a mother. And that mattered more than any dollar figure on paper. Across the room, Lucas shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. Emma's smug expression faltered for the first time. Their power play had backfired, and now it was their names that would be dragged through scrutiny, their lies under the microscope. As I walked out of the courthouse, clutching my blue folder against my chest, I felt lighter. Not victorious in the sense of celebration, but in a quieter, more profound way. I had stood tall in the face of betrayal and humiliation, and I hadn't crumbled. Still, as I stepped into the cool Chicago air, I knew this wasn't the end. People like Lucas and Emma rarely walk away after defeat. They push harder, get uglier, and find new ways to strike. The porch creaked softly beneath my rocking chair as I lifted a warm cup of coffee to my lips. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, its glow settling gently over the neighborhood I had called home for decades. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe without fear pressing on my chest. I had lost money. My reputation had been dragged through mud. My name had been whispered in grocery aisles and on street corners as though I were no longer myself. But one thing no one could take from me, not even my own son, was my honor. That belonged to me alone, and it would remain as long as I chose to hold on to it. It's strange how life teaches us through the harshest blows. I once believed being a mother meant sacrificing endlessly, giving until nothing was left. But I learned that love without respect is not love, it's servitude. And respect, whether from a stranger or from your own child, must be defended. As I sipped the last of my coffee, I thought of David, my late husband, who always told me, "You don't beg for respect. You guard it with everything you have." Those words had carried me through every storm, and now they rang truer than ever. The horizon glowed brighter, almost like a promise that the darkness had passed. Yet I knew better than to believe the battle was truly over. People like Lucas and Emma don't simply disappear. They find new shadows to hide in new ways to wound. But this time, I wasn't the same woman who once gave in quietly. I was still standing, and sometimes that alone is the greatest victory of all. Maybe this wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was the beginning of a new dawn.